all of you people who had competing events to go to today, and thank you for showing up. I was expecting a few more people, but I'm not going to let that stop us. We're going to be talking about changing the climate of the community police relations for the city of Santa Cruz. If ever there was a take-back issue, that is what we are going to talk about today. There are some housekeeping issues. The bathroom is out the door to your right, We are going to start with introductions, and we are going to end up with question and answer at the end. We will have cards to pass out so that people can write their questions. If you feel like you would like to start with a card in your seat so that you can write your questions as they go, just raise your hand, and somebody from this table will get a card for you. At the end, it's my goal that every single person who has a question has an answer when they leave. We've rented this place for 3 hours, and we did so that everybody would feel like they got their issue addressed. We've got a wonderful panel. I can see the direction of this microphone. I don't get very far away from it, and it does go away. I think our statement of issues that we're going to talk about today is that we're going to talk about the fact that the police belong to the people. We are not the police. We are not the police's people. The way this city is organized, the chief reports to the city manager. The city manager works for the city council, kind of, and that's complicated. And the citizen gets to talk to the city council. And there is 4 degrees of separation from your opinion and being able to have an influence on the police force. We want to have a more transparent system, and we are going to be talking about police review boards by the time we're all done. The search for a new Santa Cruz police chief was supposed to be transparent, and it was not. The window for applications was to be late April to early May, and it was cut short by 2 weeks, and there were qualified applicants still available. The stakeholders, including the ACLU, were to review the job advertising, but saw it after the application window was closed. The panel of stakeholders were to be able to meet with the applicants, and the ACLU group was not invited. We would like to change that process. I would like to have the panelists do self-introductions, please, and we're going to take it to about 2 minutes each, please. One other thing. This is Chief Norm Stamper. By the time we are finished with this discussion, you will be asking your question, is this guy really a cop? I've spent a good part of the last day with him, and I've decided the way I'm going to remind you that he is in law enforcement and that he is a peace officer is I want to call him Chief, just so that you get that in your head. So Chief, why don't you take it off?
I'm happy to do that, Lee, if you won't call me Chief. I'm Norm Stamper, a Californian by birth, born and raised in San Diego, spent the first 28 years of my adult life as a member of the San Diego Police Department. I was promoted up through the ranks fairly rapidly, too rapidly, I'm sure, and had a catalytic moment in my career as a rookie police officer. I thought I would just sort of smuggle this into the introduction, and if anybody wants to talk about it later, we can do that. I had vaguely liberal tendencies, I guess, as a 21-year-old when I became a police officer. And within 5 minutes on the job, I'm sucked into the police culture, becoming intimately acquainted with its power, and came to believe that what we were doing was the right thing to do. What we were doing, put bluntly, is abusing the people that we had been hired to protect and serve. When I say we, I'm talking about many of my peers, not all. Generalizations are always risky. But it's important, I think, to share this story with you. At about 14 months on the job, I stopped a young man on the streets of East San Diego, and then within 5 minutes' time, had him hooked up in the backseat of a police car and was driving him to jail. I had arrested him for a violation of California Penal Code Section 647F. That was public drunkenness in those days. It's not on the books anymore, but it was a criminal violation, very low level, but a crime. I took the cuffs off, placed him in a holding cell at the city jail, and went back out on the beat and wrote the report, which took all of probably 5 minutes because it had become boilerplate. He had a staggered gait, his eyes were bloodshot, his speech was slurred, he was this, he was that. The problem was, he was none of that. The problem was, he had an attitude. And it was because of his attitude that I arrested him. 3 weeks later, I get a subpoena. Straight drunks, to use the vernacular, don't go to court. They simply pay the $29 fine, go on about their business. This guy decided to contest the arrest. I knew what to do about that. I'd seen senior officers handle this. I sidled up to the prosecutor and suggested to him that he might want to dismiss the charges. He asked why, and I said, well, it's kind of a skinny pinch. And he said, tell me about it. And I proceeded to tell him about this guy and his attitude. Officer Stamper was the man drunk. Well, he had a really bad attitude. Was he drunk? He called me a pig. Officer Stamper, was he drunk? In a public place, and unable to care for himself or the safety of others, which would satisfy the statute. And I thought for a moment, how long do I want to carry on this lie? And they said, no, he wasn't. But I figured, you're on my side. Wink, wink, poke, poke, I've seen it done, please. What's this third degree about? He then asked me if the Constitution of the United States meant anything to me. And I was enraged. His three-piece pinstripe suit, his slick-back Hollywood hairdo, and his tortoise-shell glasses. He looked like he stepped off a movie set playing an attorney. I'm out there in the real world, in the tough world. I'm out there in the heat and the cold, San Diego. I'm out there being spit on by people in the backseat of that cage car, so on and so forth. I'm in the real world. Anyway, by the time I slithered down the stairs of the San Diego County Courthouse, I'd been transformed emotionally from anger to embarrassment to shame. And I was awash in shame. I had been busted, and thank God for that principled prosecutor who triggered something in me and that produced a lifelong commitment to social justice, to the truth, to constitutional law enforcement. And I'm sure I've gone beyond my 2 minutes, and thank you.
Sandy, pull the mic close to you, please.
Yes, I can do that. So, thank you all for being here. I know that there are a lot of events going on today. Many of you might want to be at Climate Action Day. We'd be outside, which would be nice, getting a little vitamin D. But I really appreciate that you all have shown up to participate in this conversation. I want it to be a conversation. My name is Sandy Brown. As many of you know, I'm a member of the Santa Cruz City Council. I was also a member of the Citizens Police Review Board at the City of Santa Cruz. I was Chris Crone's appointee. I feel like he should really be the one up here talking about this from his perspective, but I'm going to talk about it from my perspective. I don't want to talk about all the things that didn't work, but I do want to use the lessons that I learned from trying to be a participant in civilian police oversight to help us move the conversation forward about how we can do it better and why we need to do it better. As a member of the Santa Cruz City Council, I'm very supportive of civilian oversight of the police, transparency, and I hope I have a good working relationship with our police department, and I hope that we can move the conversation forward together with the police. I am really honored to be here sitting next to Norm Stamper. I was at the WTO protests in Seattle, and I had the privilege of being in the airport ready to board an airplane that was paid for by the labor community organization that I worked with at the time. It was we called it our union junket. We watched what was happening at the end of that day as we were getting on a plane to go home, and we were safe, and we could not understand what was going on, and we cried, and together. And after that, we were mad. We got mad, and it was the same year I was appointed to the City of Santa Cruz Citizens Police Review Board. I have a lot of things to say about the challenges of that experience, and not in a whiny way for me, but the challenges of actually trying to use the process for the benefit of the people. And I imagine John and Malkin, you're honored. I'm honored to be here with all of you, really. I mean, I feel like I just want to listen. I don't have all that much to say, although I do have a lot to say. So, but I want to listen. So, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks for inviting me to be here on this panel. My name is John Malkin, and a little deja vu speaking about creating police review in Santa Cruz for me. The first meetings for the coalition to create a police review commission happened at the Resource Center for Nonviolence at the other building in 1991. It was about 6 months before Rodney King beating happened. I was a community studies student, and I decided to do my internship with the coalition to create a police review commission. I wrote a thesis about this that is a small book. If anyone wants to read it, I can give you that. I have a digital copy of it. Samara Marion was my mentor at the coalition. Mike Rodkin was my thesis advisor at the university. So I spent a year helping to create the board. It took then until 1994 before the board was actually put in place. I was appointed to serve on the board, which I did from 95 to 97. And here we are 25 years later, and we still are in a place where we're searching for police accountability here in Santa Cruz. When I served on the board, I realized very quickly that it was becoming a tool for supporting a closed police system rather than serving the stated goals and values of police review, those being independence, openness, and accountability. I can tell you details about that, and I've written and spoken quite a bit about how that was happening. It was quite often the police administration openly opposed the board. But then board members, most of them that I was working with, and we were reviewing complaints, did specific things to undermine the goals of the board. One of them was to have a set of recommendations that we all decided we wanted to tell the police, and people on the board decided, let's not tell them this one because they'll get upset, and we want to have a positive relationship, and in the long run, if we have a positive relationship, we'll really be able to make some changes. That's one example among 3 or 4 specific things that happened. My thesis from community studies about the creation of the board ended up being pulled out of a folder when I met with a police officer named Steve Clark in 1996. He said, I've been investigating your work as an activist and a member of the Police Review Board. He highlighted sections of my thesis that he said were anti-authority and anti-police. He also said that he had collected information about me that if he made it public, it would be embarrassing and he wouldn't tell me what it was. If this sounds familiar,
It does.
yeah, because in 2014, 20 years later, the same officer who now is a deputy chief of police met with a sitting city council person, Micah Posner, and used almost the same sort of term. They were talking about license plate readers. The police officer was trying to encourage Micah to not have a public discussion at a city council meeting about whether or not to have license plate readers. When Micah Posner was saying, I think it's important to have this as a public discussion, Deputy Chief Clark said to Micah, I could get you, and if I did, you wouldn't know it was me. I will do it through a third party. I'm open to answer questions later about any aspects of this. And Samara Marion luckily has had successes in her work at the OCC. And though I remain skeptical about creating more government bodies to correct other government bodies, I still regularly support the idea of police review in the context of cultivating an overall more democratic culture where the citizens here have control over what the police are doing. I love Norm Stamper's notion of 51% community control and 49% police control over all aspects of policing. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Samara Marion, and I came to Santa Cruz in 1977, and it has always felt like home, and I stayed here for quite some time. I went to UCSC and loved it, went to law school, came back and was a public defender for about 15 years, and it was through being a public defender, seeing that the individuals who had the most contact with the police, that there were things that police were doing that just were wrong. They were unconstitutional, the way people were treated was wrong, and there was a series of events that had happened in Santa Cruz, so it was an opportunity for lots of community-based organizations to come together, and that's how I got to meet John, who's been just, is a gem in Santa Cruz. And there's others here, like Sherry, there's just people that we came together and we worked really hard and thought, did all the research, looked at models, worked with city council, brought people from other places. It was inspiring. We held press conferences. We did so much. And we had a vision of what would be an effective civilian review board. And we believed in it. It was so sad to hear and see the sequence of events. But for me personally, I left Santa Cruz, and it wasn't, I didn't really want to leave, but for reasons, I left and I had the opportunity to work in an oversight agency in San Francisco. And so it used to be called the Office of Citizen Complaints. It just recently was renamed the Department of Police Accountability, and I've worked there for 16 years. And it has been a really positive experience, and I welcome the opportunity, and I'm so honored to be here meeting with you all, and also to meet Norm Stamper. I've read his books. He's just such an important figure in civilian oversight and the bridge between police and civilian oversight and community policing, that it's just such an honor. I never thought I'd get to meet him in person. So that all of you worked hard to bring him here. Again, just my hats off to everyone who's been so diligent about bringing everyone together, and also that you would come on a beautiful day and come inside to talk about these important issues. I welcome the opportunity to do that.
So Norm, can you kind of set the groundwork about, from my perspective, would be police militarization and command and control that make the people feel like they're separate from the police?
I'm happy to do that, or take a stab.
And take your own approach. Of course.
Thank you, Lee. Lee and I have had a wonderful continuing conversations actually before I arrived in town, and I'm so appreciative for that and for all the work that you do in this community. It is true that the police in America belong to the people and not the other way around. But there are many police officers who unfortunately embrace exactly the opposite perspective. That they're the cops and you're not. And so when it comes to what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, or even if they're going to do it, you're oftentimes not even considered. The community is not considered. So if it is true that the police do the public's business, and it is true that partnerships have certainly potential power to create more reasoned and responsive and responsible police work, then this conversation between police and community does need to develop into an authentic partnership, not some cosmetic PR version. And I will repeat what John quoted me as saying, and that is, if there's a senior partner in that partnership, it is the community in a free and democratic society. Now, tragically, many citizens within the community have accepted the kind of steamroller effect that a police department can produce. It's an institution. It's a formidable institution. It's powerful. It's been around for a long time. And it has deep roots in the community. And it does have ways, unfortunately, of intimidating people through threats, implied and explicit. But I do believe, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow when we really address full-on the issue of police militarization and command and control. Just briefly, by definition, my definition of command and control is everything starts at the top. The police chief, the sheriff, the person who sits at the very top of that pyramid sets policy and commands people working for him or for her to do certain things and not do certain other things. Control is established through supervision, through management, through policies and procedures, oftentimes through inspection. It's like, I say this is the way it's going to be, and now I've got a staff and all this machinery to make sure that the way I've said things are going to go, in fact, go that way. That doesn't allow any room for community participation, needless to say. And in many departments, it doesn't allow rank and file participation, which has can have a very positive and effective influence on policies and procedures, but not done in a vacuum. Not done by ceding authority to our police departments to police us. Community policing is the community policing itself. And I put a period there. I don't qualify that. I don't say except for this and but for that. Obviously, in the real world, that nice theoretical construct needs to be examined. It needs to be appreciated for its complications, its difficulty in actually carrying that out. But imagine the community engaged in all police operations. all police operations. The community sitting side by side, shoulder to shoulder with police commanders, rank and file police officers, setting policy, developing programs, managing crises, choosing, along with their law enforcement partners, who's going to be a cop in this city. Citizens should be at the table with an official role in the choice of who gets hired and who doesn't. Citizens should be teaching in the academy in areas of expertise. One area of expertise that I think applies to everybody is life in the community. Community-based organizations, the concerns that any given neighborhood has about crime, about, quality of life issues, so on and so forth. Citizens involved in oversight, instrumental and indispensable. Citizens either investigating alleged police misconduct, which is to say through professionals that they hire. You don't want amateurs conducting personnel investigations or criminal investigations for that matter. You want top flight professional investigators who know how to reconstruct a scene, who know how to interview people, who know how to interrogate people, should that be necessary, who know, in short, how to conduct an accurate, timely, fair, impartial investigation that leads to a conclusion, whether an officer is guilty or not, whether his or her actions were permissible, if not, perhaps even laudable. That occasionally happens as a result of a citizen's investigation. And we find that exoneration is the proper finding in that case. I think it's just vital that citizens be involved, particularly in use of force review. When a police officer raises a fist, pulls a gun, or in any other fashion engages in some degree or level of force, that police officer is engaged in the most sensitive, oftentimes the most crucial work that a police officer can do. We grant to law enforcement, federal, state, and local level, from border to border and shore to shore, the right to use lethal force should circumstances dictate. That is an awesomely important decision that an individual cop makes. And in every case, that decision needs to be reviewed. And it needs to be reviewed, in my judgment, by a combination of police professionals and citizen activists who are in fact actively engaged in their oversight responsibility. So I think it's just very, very important that new life be pumped into an old model, or a new model be created, or in some fashion or another, that this community and every other community in the country accepts responsibility for citizen oversight. I could go on, I won't. I would sort of conclude with this notion, and that is, I had in mind a certain exercise that I was going to do. Lee was kind enough to bring me. I'm not going to do it today. I think I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah. It might be entertaining. I don't mean to make of it a performance.
You can do it twice.
By popular demand.
Encore.
All right. So
I'll
then
do
I'm
it first.
well over my time, and I apologize.
You can have my
I asked for a rubber band.
Grant you.
I asked for a rubber band from Lee, and he brings me all these. If this looks familiar, and you like asparagus, you know what I'm holding here in my hand. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm very concerned about the recording aspect. I know I can be heard way back there.
Right.
But for the recording aspect, are we okay? Okay, then we don't need that. No, thank you. Okay, here's the deal from my point of view. I don't imagine how any organization, community-based, governmental, corporate, whatever, can operate without a vision. without a crystal clear picture of where they're going as an organization. I love it, Sam, that you use the word visionary. I think it's vital that we have a vision of what good police work really looks like. And so I've spent many, many years articulating and crystallizing my own personal vision. It's obviously what I'm going to share with you in just a moment. But I would ask you to be thinking about your vision for policing in this community. It's also, I think, important that we keep our feet firmly planted on the ground. So I'm going to share with you my vision, first person, present tense. It's an as-if proposition. And I'll explain why I'm doing that in a few moments. And then I'm going to share with you the current reality, at least as I see it today. So here goes. I see policing that is in fact reasoned and responsible and accountable. I see policing that is carried out by capable, confident, conscientious, and compassionate, sorry for the alliteration, people who care about other people. They can think in the abstract, they can reason, they understand systems, they understand politics, even though they are, as the announcement for the police chief position in this city put it, apolitical. They are individuals, in short, who are just very competent human beings, competent and caring. And they're honest, and they're ethical. Their integrity is written all over the way they communicate, the way they make decisions, the way they handle conflict. They are quality people. And they believe firmly in this partnership notion. They understand that they do belong to the people, that they do the public's business. And while I'm on the topic, when I use the word citizen, I'm not talking about citizenship. I use it to distinguish against civilian. Because you are not civilians in the community-police relationship in my framework. You are citizens in the sense that we can talk about the citizens of New York or the citizenry of Ferguson, Missouri. It's that notion of citizens. And I use it for lack of a better term, and if anybody's got one, please give it to me. I've tried people, but somehow in certain contexts it just doesn't work. It gets a little watered down. So I really do see police officers who are fully engaged with their communities and embrace, in actuality, this 51-49 partnership. Comes to a meeting, a police officer says, well, you're the senior partner. Where do we go from here? What do we do? I'm looking for your leadership. Police officers, police executives who reject heroic leadership. It's just too easy to fall into this trap of believing that because you hold high position, you're an important person, an extremely important person, which leads to entitlement, which leads to closed doors, which leads to, I'll decide what we're going to do here, thank you very much. I see policing that distinctly rejects militarism, that understands that there are times and places for military-like tactics, military-like weapons, military-like uniforms, military-like appearance that causes some people some heartburn or heartache. But I gotta tell you, I was present at the McDonald's in the aftermath of a mass murder. I saw 20 moms and dads and kids, some in mid-bite with their fat macs, the massacre of McDonald's. Police have got to be prepared for that extremely rare, very unconventional situation that does present itself from time to time. As it did in a community that told itself, it'll never happen here in Sandy Hook. We will not have someone who will fire lethal projectiles into the bodies of children. We have to be prepared for that. It's sad and it's true. But we need police officers who are very carefully selected for that duty, who understand that it is the exception, not the norm, who reject SWAT tactics on those early morning drug raids, who label them high-risk warrant service. What's wrong with picking up the phone and saying, hey, we got a warrant, can you come out on the front porch? What's wrong with letting an individual who's the subject or whose home is the subject of a search warrant or even an arrest warrant, watching them for a while, see when they come out, make a normal routine traffic stop. Instead of 10 people dressed in military garb, full body armor, Kevlar helmets, semi-automatic, if not automatic weapons and flashbangs of the type that almost killed and disfigured that poor child in Georgia when they tossed a flashbang into his crib. That's not acceptable in America, that kind of militarism. So we need disciplined people, we need well-trained people, and we need to recognize that they're not going to do it very often. It's going to be the exception. Okay, current realities, not every police officer treats their citizens as partners. Not every police officer treats other people with dignity and respect. Not every police officer is honest. Not every police officer engages in ethical behavior. Part of the current reality is that we have militarized the hell out of an institution that is designed for peacekeeping. Part of the current reality is, I could go on forever, but you may have noticed that my hand is starting to shake. That is not for effect. That is real. That's happening. Part of the current reality is my fingers are turning a very interesting shade of green right now. And part of the current reality for me is that I was once told by a neurologist who saw me do this, which was many years ago, who said, you know, you're going to do neurological damage if you hold that tension very long. And I said, thank you, I really appreciate that. So I've got it timed. Part of the current reality is I need to reduce this tension. I must reduce it. Figuratively speaking, it could kill me. Part of the current reality is, while I would love to believe that we are all of those wonderful things that I shared with you in my vision for policing, we don't have to be that good, do we? Really? You know, in Seattle, as well as in San Diego, we call ourselves America's finest, you know, and we decided we're really going to be the most constitutional, the most compassionate, the most effective law enforcement agency in the land. So we call ourselves America's finest. Well, why do we have to be America's finest? Why can't we just be the best police department west of the Mississippi? See that tension come down?
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, I'm still shaking. This finger's really doing a dance. As soon as I said it, it started performing. It's amazing what can happen to me if I say, well, we don't have to be the best police department. Why don't we be the best police department in California? Or maybe in Southern California, and I'm reducing the tension. Or why not the best police department, one of San Diego County's better law enforcement agencies? Tension is reducing. Or you could just say, why don't I drop all pretense to this lofty vision of policing and say, on the side of our police car, San Diego Police Department, we're no worse than anybody else.
Yeah.
Tension's gone. And so is my dream, and so is my drive, and so is my enthusiasm for engaging in practices that help bring about social justice, that bring about community integrity, that bring about my vision for policing. So I'm going to leave it at that, and there are tricks. for reducing the tension in this direction as opposed to this. It does get into physics.
Yeah.
So that is what I had in mind for a while.
Sandy, you want to comment on that? Or make your own comment?
Or you want to rubber band?
Well,
Yeah, you want to
I didn't come prepared for that, but maybe tomorrow if you do it again. I'll be prepared. I just watched one of my heroes on this topic. I watched his finger, all the blood drain out of it. I don't know if you can see it out there, but that's tension. And that is something that I think is really important for us to think about as we think about how to move forward in this community, because what I see is a whole lot of blame gaming on all sides. I hear people say, well, if we have an extreme event, the shooting of Sean Arles, for example, I'm going to say it because we haven't had a chance to talk about this in a public forum, at least not as much as I would like to see it talked about, and I hope we continue the conversation. The officer who shot and killed a man with a young child, a young father, is also grieving. He's devastated. And what I see is siloing, and I see our police, it's not about individual officers doing the wrong thing or doing the right thing. It's about a culture within the police department, and it's about the kind of culture that Norm Stamper is talking about, the entitlement, the sense of power. It is hard to escape that at the same time that we are dealing with, we have officers who are trying to protect our quality of life. They want to do the right thing. I don't think any police officer comes into this thinking, I just want to go out guns blazing and, Wild West. That's not the mentality. That there is a culture within our law enforcement agency, and not just Santa Cruz. I mean, it's pervasive all over the country, all over the world. And we have to find a way to have a conversation that doesn't make people feel threatened, right? Whether it's the police department or the people who are being marginalized in our society. And I think in the case of Santa Cruz, we have had some serious incidents that are exceptions. But when the overall behavior, the militarized behavior, becomes normalized, it's not just an exception, it's normalized. It's the move along of homeless people. It is the way people who don't have protection, who don't have a voice in our community are treated without any accountability. That's why I want to work on this issue the most. I was on the Citizens Police Review Board when Chris Crone was here, and should really be up here because he's the one who convinced me to get involved in this work in the first place. He gave me the pleasure of serving on the Citizens Police Review Board by appointing me back when we could actually get individual appointments. So I was on the Police Review Board when we had the one and only independent investigation and large-scale public hearings, ongoing public hearings about an excessive use of force complaint on a protest, and the details don't matter. It was when President Clinton decided in his infinite wisdom to drop bombs in Sarajevo. And our Congress member at the time supported that, and he was speaking at the Museum of Art and History, and there was a large-scale protest. Excessive use of force was engaged, and that led to a year and a half, I think, freshman members, a year and a half of the Citizens Police Review Board's engagement in this issue. We were frustrated, we were stymied. We had a majority at the time on the Citizens Police Review Board to get that independent investigation. We had a really hard time getting information. It dragged on. The model that we had was not efficacious. And we got a lot of, we got some flack for it, but we did our best under the circumstances. And so what I would like to see is a conversation about how we can create some kind of model that actually gets the job done, that is not threatening to the police department. That's not my intention at all, but that allows the community to feel like they have some say in how the police conducts its business, how the police department conducts its business. And the dig in your heels, circle the wagons approach has clearly not worked. Another reason I am so pleased and so happy to be sitting here next to North Stamford, because that is not what Seattle Police Department did after WTO protests. And I think that we have to come to some kind of way of bringing our police department together with the community and not just siloing ourselves. I'll leave it at that for now, but I have a lot more to say on that. Thank you.
John, you want to take it, or Sam, do you want to step in and get us organized?
I'm glad that you mentioned Sean Arlt, and I agree that there hasn't been some forum for discussing that killing of this man who was holding a rake. The Santa Cruz Police Department recently, and the DA said that they investigated the shooting and that it was justified. Similarly, with the killing of 15-year-old Luke Smith by sheriff's deputies a month after that shooting of Sean Arlt, they also said it was justified. I think one of the broader interesting things to notice is that we're living in a culture where when someone does harm to someone else, we decide to punish them, and depending on the severity of the harm they cause, they get punished more. So in that context, it's not surprising that police officers defend themselves against being held responsible for causing harm. They're like the rest of us, I didn't do it, or I did it because it should have been done. I think all of that, it's a larger thing, but I would like to see restorative justice replace the system that's happening now, and that be a part of policing. And also, I mean, if police are spending a lot of time practicing shooting at us, when they arrive, they will likely shoot at us, or threaten to shoot at us, or hit us, or restrain us, or all of that. If their training is more, if the emphasis is more on nonviolent communication, restorative justice, crisis intervention, knowing how to deal with people who are in a mental health crisis. I think it was your book that reminded me, Norm, that half of the people killed by police in this country are in the midst of a mental health crisis. Even things like Cop Watch and the Black Lives Matter movement. I would even encourage, I don't know if this has ever been done really, but the notion of kind of like conscientious objection in policing. If you don't want to be involved in doing that kind of stuff you're being asked to do now, get some help to get out and find a more productive way to serve our community. The February 13th raids also have really affected people deeply. It was scary, people are still scared. Santa Cruz Police Department, as you all know, ended up saying, we got duped. We didn't know that they were going to grab people for immigration violations. We were part of the drug gang raid. So I would say look more closely at that. And also, Norm was mentioning the militarization of the police and how, well, here it manifested that morning, February 13th, helicopter, armored personnel carriers, some of them local, some brought in from elsewhere, Santa Cruz police blocking roads with AR-15s to support that. Even leaving aside the immigration component of that morning, is that military-style raid the kind of raid that we want to accept in a gang-related case, in a drug-related case, in a gang and drug-related case? Maybe people would get together and say, yeah, we need to smash windows, flashbang grenades, helicopter, and maybe not. I think there needs to be a wider discussion of those issues. I'll say just two things about my experience on the Police Review Board. So kind of like, watch out for these things that can happen when you're creating oversight, community accountability for the police. We early on decided, we looked at so many different models and ideas of how to create the Police Review Board. We decided not to put it on the ballot, but to go to the City Council and support the City Council candidates, get them elected, who would support the idea of creating an independent, powerful Police Review Board. Those people were elected largely on the program of creating a Police Review Board. Once they were on the City Council, they did not do that. And they created something that was weak and didn't have the powers that we had all asked for. Some of the first meetings of the Police Review Board where we're sitting in a room and handed a file that was about a complaint against a police officer. There was a police officer in the room with us. And I said, what are you doing here? And so we even had to negotiate for a few months around, we're the Independent Police Review Board, we want to be independent. We actually had those first meetings at a room in the police department as well. So we worked that out. Turned out some of those first files also that were handed to us, and we were told, here's the investigation the police department has done into these complaints. In those files was also commendations that police officer had received, awards, special services they've been involved in, as sort of a defense packet against the allegations regarding the complaint. Michael Hernandez was on the Police Review Board with me. He eventually became a city council member. There was a point where people were coming to the Police Review Board meetings that are public in the city council chambers, and we're all up there, and the police chief is up there as well. And people said, part of the point of this whole thing is that we can go somewhere besides the police when we have a concern. Michael Hernandez actually said out loud during our Police Review Board meeting when that question arose, he said, the police chief is part of the board. Well, actually, no, he's not. That's just a metaphor in an actual event that illustrates how the board's purpose was corrupted very quickly, consciously, unconsciously, in different ways. Other board members were pretty clear with me, I'm afraid to say this thing out loud. Those guys have guns, badges. So just some warning signs about police review.
Sam, can you kind of launch off into how police review boards are formed? Because there are a lot of components that can be mixed and matched, and some work and some don't.
I'm happy to do that. But I wonder if I could take a moment or two to talk about the Sean Holt case.
Please do.
And it's only in that I was given a lot of materials, and I wanted to understand what are some of the issues in this community. And I most certainly I had read about it in the paper, but in the last few days, I wanted to look at the actual video of the dispatch discussion, the dispatch and the interchange when the call came in, and then what happened. And as I listened and looked through it, it reminded me of so many other shootings across the country and in San Francisco as well. And all of the warning signs of an individual who was in mental health crises. And as has been pointed out here, a huge proportion of the officer-involved shootings involve people who are in crises. And in San Francisco, there was a series of shootings. Some of them involved individuals who were in mental health crisis, disproportionately people of color. And it was through that series, in addition to there were horrible racist text messages that came out to the public, but had happened through a number of years, and that was made public. But through that series, the chief of police, knowing that community outrage, and it was widespread, and that's the power that you all have, is the outrage, and to be able to bring that to all the pressure points, including in the media and to, of course, your elected officials, but in every possible way, it ultimately resulted in the resigning of the chief. And it also resulted in the Department of Justice not coming in, unfortunately, under a consent decree, but at least in this process called collaborative reform. But the thing that I wanted to emphasize about that whole process is, when I looked at that shooting, it was horrific, but again, it is happening across the country, and it is to individuals whose lives are not being preserved because, and this is the part where it's our responsibility, but I think we don't take the responsibility, which is the police are doing the job that we have empowered them to do. And the reality is, most use of force policies, officers are following that policy. So that the fact that the officer wasn't charged criminally, he did exactly what the policy said he was supposed to do. He would not be charged administratively. That's what a civilian oversight body does. They look administratively. Did they break any of the rules? That officer, like officers across the country, they followed the rules that normally, again, it depends on each city. It's the chief of police has issued rules, or, I mean, in San Francisco, it is not the chief of police who issues the rules, and that's part of what I want to talk about civilian oversight is every rule, every procedure that the police department follows, it goes through a public process where there's a police commission, and they are appointed 4 from the mayor's office and 3 from the board of supervisors. So these are individuals whom they are volunteer positions, but they're also, they've been appointed, there's been a process, and they commit a substantial amount of time. So when a rule is adopted, the police department and our agency, that's where a civilian oversight is crucial, and it has to have teeth and it has to have power, but our agency, we are a part of the rulemaking, and community-based organizations, and that's what I just want to spend a moment to talk about. After these shootings, after these horrific text messages that police officers were texting to each other where you thought, is this 100 years ago? I mean, it was just graphic and grotesque, homophobic, anti-Semitic, misogynistic. A window, though, into the culture, an absolute window. And there were individuals who were in positions of power, like a sergeant texting to other individuals. So, again, a window. But after that process, the police commission said, we're rewriting the use of force policy. It was from 1994. And community-based organizations will be at the table to rewrite that policy. So it was a process by which I was at the table, the ACLU was at the table, our bar association was at the table, the Coalition on Homelessness was at the table, There's other organizations as well. They were the main organizations in San Francisco that are community-based, so that we could talk about every provision, because we're authorizing police to use lethal force. So we could talk about, one, officers are to de-escalate when possible. They're required. So we have it's a new provision. And when I looked at the use of force policy of this police department, it says nothing about de-escalation. It says nothing even about the sanctity of life. And when we had these meetings to rewrite the use of force policy, it took months. And the first thing we started to talk about was sanctity of life. And these meetings were with the police. So it was an assistant chief of police and the Police Officers Association and multiple officers. In fact, at times we felt like we were outnumbered. But that process was so important to be able to, after months, talk about what should the policy be. Of course, the Police Officers Association disagreed. Of course, there were many provisions the police department disagreed with. But we were able to have a policy that we believed in, that it requires crisis intervention team officers to respond as first responders. So when I listened to that dispatch tape, it was clear, here is someone in crisis. Why would you not send out an officer who's been trained, and that CIT is its own dramatically important response to crisis calls. And across the country, under the there's a massive reform movement, and one key component is you train your officers, a select group. This is one model, and I think it's one model I support wholeheartedly, is you train at least 25% of your police officers where they are CIT officers. They know how to respond. They want to respond to mental health crisis calls, and they're the ones that are sent out. So that instead of what happens where officers get to the scene, and what's the first thing they do? Drop the gun, or guns are different. Drop the rake, drop the knife. They're screaming at a person who's in crisis. We know that doesn't work. We know that that's going to result in a shooting. So to have a process and to have a use of force policy where officers are, one, mandated to de-escalate. That notion of command and control, it turns that on its head, because it's having to go into a situation and communicate in a style that matches what the situation is. Of course, there's going to be times it's a robbery where you're going to be yelling at the person, but in a crisis call, it requires a different skill set. Yeah. So I just wanted to use that as an example of real community input in a process where ultimately, though, it also we had a finished product that we believed in, and the Police Officers Association had their own use of force policy. Even though they were at the table, they refused to agree to the provisions we had. And some of those provisions involved sanctity of life, de-escalation, proportionality, where do not use a machine gun for a situation that requires communication. So there's proportionality where, again, in a mental health crisis call, why is there the resort to lethal force when what would be appropriate is starting out with communication? So those kinds of concepts, including, part of what we looked at was what are the causes for a lethal force? And in San Francisco, it was also shooting at cars, shooting at people who are mentally ill, and shooting at cars. So key provisions were police can't shoot at cars unless something other than the car is threatening the officer or someone else with serious bodily injury or death. So we had provisions that were based on what we saw as the causes for lethal force, as well as how to deal with other kinds of issues. And the provisions deal with vulnerable populations. There's a lot of issues around homelessness, similar to here in San Francisco as well. So we drafted that policy. The POA drafted their own policy, but ultimately we had a police commission that had a backbone, that showed leadership. And that also made the difference, because it was, although it was a diverse body and they weren't all in agreement, there was the president of the police commission truly believed in police reform, so that the use of force policy was voted on, and it was a 7-0 vote, and it is now the policy in the police department. That doesn't mean it's being followed, though, and that's a whole other discussion, because it's a police department that's entrenched, that doesn't believe in those provisions, and in part, they've been also told from the union, and that's a whole other issue, that the strength of the unions is unbelievable. So they believe the story that the union tells, which is, this is a policy that will make you as an officer unsafe. And so the need for discussion, the need to have alliances is so important. And the last thing I just want to say is, at the end of the day, and I know I've done this work for 16 years, and Donna Salazar is also here from our agency, and she runs our mediation program, and she's worked in our agency for a long time as well. At the end of the day, we work with, we're completely separate, but we are working with police officers all the time because of the work we do. And at the end of the day, when I see an officer-involved shooting happen, the officers who committed that shooting, their lives are ruined, and I have no question, I have no doubt about that. And I've seen, I'd say especially women, I've seen them in a very short period of time leave the department. So that the tragedy on both sides is phenomenal. It is. And so from my perspective, the great thing that civilian oversight can do is push forward all of the police reforms that are necessary, and there's so many that are needed. The complaint process is so important. People shouldn't have to go to the police department to make a complaint. Their civilian oversight does many really important things in that kind of way. But I also think the need to understand, to reason. I mean, when there's threats like that, there's no reason to have that kind of discussion. But to be working with police who are interested in the dialogue, I think that that's a whole other level. And right now, when there's so many shootings of police, the mentality is even more circle the wagons and be entrenched. So I feel both, this is the moment, and there's so much great that can be done, and it's also, it's a critical moment because I see law enforcement across the country becoming less willing to talk.
Sam, give us some guidance. I'm of the opinion that we don't ask City Council for anything. We put it on the ballot so it's ours, and it doesn't belong to the City Council. Can you talk to that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a no-brainer. I just think you have to have a ballot initiative. That's the only way. That's the only way you get to craft exactly what you want, what your powers are. You have control of it. And I think we learned a huge lesson. We struggled with what to do. And we really thought working with City Council was the way to go, and we believed in it. And we were burned. We were absolutely burned, and it was crushing, absolutely crushing. So, and there are cities everywhere who have done this. And in San Francisco, it was a ballot initiative in 1982. And it was a phenomenal group of people that put it together. But the interesting thing is there have been ballot initiatives to strengthen our agency over and over and over again. So just recently, because of the shootings, there was a ballot initiative to give us the power to go out to every officer involved shooting. Because our agency, we are an investigative body. So the police department, you could go to the police department to file a complaint, but anyone can come to our agency, and most people come to our agency. We take the complaint, we interview the complainant, we interview witnesses, officers are required to come to our office, and we interview officers. It's required, it's part of the ballot initiative process, it's part of the procedures. So there's a whole procedure in it. So we're investigating complaints, we make findings, we then are working with the police department depending on how serious the case is. Low-level cases, then there's a hearing in front of a designee of the police chief. But on serious cases, we can file charges and there will be a hearing. So that's part of what we do. We do complaints. We get, I'd say, around 600, 700 complaints a year. And we've got an investigative body of, we're an agency of like 35 and there's 20 investigators. There's things that are problematic. You have to have trained investigators. They have to be top-notch. And the process is time-consuming to investigate every complaint. But it's powerful to know what's gone wrong. And that's where, there's one model is investigative models. That's one model. The reality is there are no two models the same, and our agency, we investigate complaints, but we do many other things, and I just wanted to talk about that for a second, which is we investigate complaints. We also run a mediation program, and that's Donna's here, and she runs our mediation program. That's an important thing because it's a time where on low-level complaints, police officers and a trained mediator, and that's part of what Donna does, is she has a whole group of trained mediators, and the complainant are able to discuss what happened. And the reason, it's important because it can heal those kind of low-level complaints. There can be a discussion where a police officer actually learns what he or she did wrong, and it often is as simple as their attitude.
Yeah.
So that process is really important. So the other thing that we do is we make policy recommendations, and these are all components that you can write into your initiative, your ballot initiative, so you can't have a city council person say, oh, we don't want to do this, or we don't want to do that, or we're going to water it down. The initiative process lets you write those things in. So the ability to make policy is huge. And that's part of, I do complaint investigation review, but I do a lot of policy work. And what I do is I work with community-based organizations on the issues that we see in our complaints and issues that are being brought to us, and then we sit down with the police department. And because we have a commission and because there's other kinds of rules, they have to sit down and listen to us. It doesn't mean that they have to do what we ask them to do. And the times where they do what we ask them to do are more when community-based individuals are putting the pressure on in every way, in every political forum, through the media. So that's where there's so many moving parts that are necessary to keep civilian oversight effective. And I'd say it's the involvement of the community. And the last thing that another component that we're going to start doing is audit. And that's where there's a whole auditing model for civilian oversight. And in San Francisco, again, because community-based organizations could see that we did not have enough power, there was a ballot initiative not only to enable us to go to every officer involved shooting, because the way the legislation had been written, we could only investigate complaints if we had a complaint. So that was a limitation. If we didn't have a complaint, we couldn't go out to every officer involved shooting. And so of 8 shootings a year, which unfortunately there were years where there were that many, we often only got 3 complaints. So those other 5, we had no power to investigate. So the ability to audit is a really important ability. And so because of these shootings, there were 2 ballot initiatives, one to enable us to go to shootings, and second, now we have the power to audit, which means every 2 years our agency, at a minimum, we have to audit the use of force that the police department uses, and also the disciplinary process. And what that means right now is you all learn nothing about discipline. You don't learn about police discipline. We don't either. I mean, in terms of the community in San Francisco, in part because we have police departments that don't give that information. So that's also, if the community is not demanding it, it's not there. If politicians aren't demanding it, it's not given. But there's also, and at a later point we can talk about, there's a California Supreme Court case that limits the ability to have those hearings that were discussed. We've lost that ability through the decision Copley Press. We cannot, there's not open hearings on police discipline. That is a huge travesty. It undermines our ability to have accountability. And that often is operating where people are furious. Why don't we know what officer was charged, even administratively, with what allegations, and why don't we know was discipline imposed? There's a Supreme Court decision that prevents that information to be given to the public. However, there is lots of other information that can be given, and that's where police departments could give information about just not naming the officers, but a lot more detail. And again, we can have those discussions at a later point, but all of that is to say is that there's lots of models, And there's lots of ways to put together a civilian oversight agency. And I'm happy to share all that information, but ultimately, I think it also involves, what do you see as the problems, and what is it that you're wanting to solve? And that's also part of it, because the other thing that's always attached to everything is a price tag. So the agency that Don and I work for, our budget is over $5 million. We've existed since 1983, and the electoral population in San Francisco, by continuing to give us more power, the mayor has to continue to give us money, and we continue to have the resources and the support across the board because of all of those pieces. And again, it's community based.
I'm starting to receive some questions, and one of them I can't understand is Stacy come up. Sandy, would you talk about the system that we have, which I think is called the independent auditor? And as I understand it, our independent auditor works and lives in Palo Alto. And I would like to say to the audience that if you'll look at your handout, I think the last page has got a list of references that we have used to prepare that I've used to prepare for this, and I don't know what number it is, but the report from Pasadena that was prepared for Pasadena to get their police review board was so thorough. They hired an agency that does this for a living, and if you read that report, it will give you a lot of insight as to the various models. And they talk about Palo Alto, who's a city the same size as Santa Cruz. They also talk about Davis, which happens to employ our independent auditor. So he's working for somebody else too. Sandy, would you talk about how things are working and try to get some understanding?
Sure. I have to say that I don't have a lot to say about how things are working because there's not a whole lot of there at the moment. Just a couple of points of comparison before I directly answer the question. I mean, so Samara is talking about an agency that has 35 staff members with investigatory expertise and power, $5 million budget. When I was on the Citizens Police Review Board and the glory days of the CPRB, we had 2 half-time staff members and 7 volunteers. That was it. I don't know what our budget was, but I'd probably have that budget somewhere in a file box. Yeah, it was about $80,000. So, so we're, it will cost money to try to create some kind of civilian oversight process. Right now, what we have is an independent auditor, investigative auditor, I can't remember the terminology, but he works based on complaints, but we don't really get complaints anymore because they all go through the police department, maybe 2 hours a week for the city of Santa Cruz. And he is charged with providing, he has subpoena powers, so the police department says that's a good thing. And yes, it is, because you need to have subpoena powers to get the information necessary for some kind of independent investigation, whether it's community-based, and I believe it should be, or professional investigator. You have to have subpoena powers in order for it to be effective. So that's one point I want to make. And again, I don't really have a lot to say, Chris. I don't know if you, Councilmember Crone, if you have anything that you want to say about your experience based on the difference, because I think that you've been involved in this for a long time, and you may have more to say on it than I do. I'm going to say we have an independent auditor, investigative auditor, who doesn't really do anything because we don't.
According to the Pasadena report,
we don't ask him to.
he's only hired for 2 hours a month.
2 hours a month?
Yeah.
It's not even a week, 2 hours a month.
Maybe it's a month
Um,
or a week, not much.
We don't ask him to do anything, so nothing happens.
I have a question here.
Steve?
Oh, can I say something quick about, so there was an incident a few years ago where somebody in the community caught on film use of force against a drunk homeless man who was already handcuffed and slammed face first into the curb and opened a big gash. His name was Richard Hardy. And because it was on video, it got made the rounds on YouTube, and it was in the press, and they said they were going to do an investigation within a week. And about 16 months after that, I was writing a story which never got published, but it was supposed to be for the good times, and I was calling the police department, and I called Bob Aronson, the independent auditor, and he told me that he did review that case. So then I asked him what he found, and he told me that his findings was not a public document. It was an intra-city document, so I don't know before or after that, but in that one case that I encountered, it didn't appear to me to be very independent, because if it's internal to the city, then it still is internal, it's still closed off from the public.
And to respond with
Publicly
the
private.
idea, it's not independent, really. And he works out in the police, facility department in town too. And John has done quite an extensive amount of research and interviewing with Bob and has looked into it. I mean, you might want to say some more about what you found out, John, because I don't think it's a model that people are going to complain. And I can give you some examples, but I don't want to go into it, so I want to hear from all of you.
One more thing, just to review, and then I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. This is the same representative who made it very difficult for the Citizens Police Review Board, when it was in existence, to make any of the independent investigation documents public. He was the investigator at the time. And it's part of the reason that the one independent investigation that board ever did dragged on to no end, and made it clear that the model wasn't working, provided evidence for the city council to disband the board. It was, that was a lot of the reason. We weren't getting anything done, right? We couldn't get anything done. That was the problem. So with that, John.
Let me interject just one question, and we are on our last hour. Sam, you talked about police commission. I don't believe we have a police commission in this city.
No.
Can you, because I'm hearing from you that a police commission is as important as a police review board? It sounds like they work together. Could you just educate us a little bit on that?
And that's where information about the models might be useful. In terms of, in San Francisco, the government is not a city manager structure as you all have here. So that makes a fundamental difference. It is a structure of a mayor and a board of supervisors where both the city and county at the same time. But I do want to just put a footnote that Oakland is a city manager structure, and they had a civilian police review commission or board that was paid staff, and Rashida Bernard, who is an amazing activist, community activist for decades, whose own, I believe, son and husband were killed in a horrible incident where an officer was also killed. So she has lived and breathed civilian oversight and has done that for years. She championed the ballot initiative in Oakland. And so I think that her and that, the history there and also what's going to happen now could serve as a good model and could give you a lot of information, because it's a different city government situation. But in San Francisco, there's a commission that sits, and they are the boss of the police department and of our agency. So they do have extraordinary authority. So in that way, There's also checks and balances where the mayor is involved in the board of supervisors, but ultimately it is the police commission that can recommend hire or firing the chief of police as involved in the chief police choice, as well as our agency as well. So that is helpful. The one thing can I say about the auditor model is the auditor model is reviewing what the police department has investigated. That's what they do. So it's already through the eyes of the police department, and so there's going to be limitations. There is another kind of model which I suggest you look at just because of what they do, and that's what's sometimes called an inspector general model. And New York now has an inspector general, and LAPD does as well. And what they do is excellent for what they do. They're looking at patterns. They have direct access to all the records of the police department also. So they are able to do analysis, really an auditing function, where they're able to look at patterns in practice, and they're able to then make recommendations of what should be changed. So if you look at the Inspector General in New York, the reports are excellent. I mean, they just did this massive report about body cameras. They've done a massive report on tasers. So they're doing excellent reports that really inform and recommend better policing. But it serves a different purpose. It's not, they don't have individuals coming from the community filing a complaint. They're looking at larger reforms, but they're doing, what they do is really important.
Let me interject, because I get a sense from the panel that you guys have got some great interaction on our conversation. I've got 7 questions, and I would like to honor my commitment that no question goes unanswered. And it's real clear to me that this is a first step. This is a beginning, and we need to get, by some mechanism, a group of people in Santa Cruz who are willing to commit themselves to making change. And we need expert help. And I think I know at least one person who said to me that she's available. So I have a question. I'm going to read it directly. Can you give insight into why and how an individual police officer feels that it is correct to shoot people who are not lethal or a threat to them? How do we as the policed community, part of the reason why I put the handouts together was to get some jargon out there for you to look at, as well as the bibliography at the end. There's lots of reading to be done. This is part of what I've read to get ready for this today. But maybe Norm would be the person to give us a little bit of insight of what goes on inside a kid's head when we have, you didn't come to hear me. We have a police officer who killed Sean, and I have it on good authority that he looks like he's having difficulty. I know in Palo Alto, where I came from, that there's an organization in Oregon State that they send their police officers to for a week of mindfulness and meditation to be able to handle that stress. But Norm, Chief Norm, can you give us some insight? Actually, I think, I don't want to put you on the spot. You've got some personal insight?
Police officers are human beings who, as candidates, are oftentimes full of idealism and goodwill, and who, like myself, made a commitment that I would not be the kind of cop that we too often hear about, read about. That I would not use the N-word, that I would not engage in any kind of racism, sexism, homophobia, misogyny, that I would reject bigotry of every brand, that I would not write CS tickets, that I would be the kind of police officer a community could be proud of. And those good intentions lasted about 5 minutes, as I've told any number of people on any number of occasions. When one gets pulled into a workplace culture, and that culture values something other than these lofty notions that I have, you have a choice. You either go along, to get along, or you get absorbed into that culture for whatever, sometimes complicated psychological reasons, or you get out. I was convinced, for example, that I would, just based on the fact that in those days, this is ancient history, I would never be involved in a police shooting. And indeed I was in 1972 when I shot and killed a man who had been threatening to kill his 3-year-old son. And I thought at the time that I was just fine, thank you very much. I was not experiencing these problems that we hear about. And of course I was fooling myself. And I was a lieutenant at the time, which should have made that shooting, impossible. Because it is beat cops and occasionally a detective, the statistics tell us, who are involved in these shootings. But without getting too deeply into the detail, I, as a lieutenant, was out looking for this man, along with a sergeant who was sitting on the other side of his personal car, so we didn't want to give ourselves away. And once I had shot and killed him, years later, 10 years later, I find myself running on the beach in Santa Monica. I was seeing a woman who lived in Santa Monica, and I went off on a nice afternoon run. 10 years after the shooting, and I saw this man's face, Joseph Anthony Carberry. I saw not his face, I saw the back of his head, which is where I had shot him, in Technicolor, huge. And I fell to the sand and I felt paralyzed. It was certainly post-traumatic stress, which I did not know I was carrying, and which, in fact, I wasn't having night sweats, I was sleeping okay. My son, young son at the time, said, "Why is it, Dad, that you're kind of down or sad on Father's Day?" I said, "Well, I didn't know I was." So I took that into account and really gave it some processing. I sought help and got help, which allows me to speak about something as horrific as what I experience and what police officers from time to time experience. I will always be grateful for that professional help. And I'll always carry maybe a little bit of a grudge that we weren't smart enough in those days to recognize that a shooting incident is traumatic by definition and does require processing in a psychological sense. I'm not responding right now, Lee, I apologize, to your question, which is what causes a police officer to shoot somebody, for example, who is unarmed? What caused Jason Van Dyke to shoot and kill Laquan McDonald in an act of cold-blooded murder in Chicago? What caused Michael Slager to shoot and kill Walter Scott as he fled from the officer? And in both cases, to cover it up and to lie about it. What causes police officers to not value the sanctity of human life, and in fact, to take a life? It is the culture, the culture, the culture. That culture does not just materialize out of nothingness. It is a function of the structure of American law enforcement. The paramilitary, bureaucratic, organizational arrangement that is American policing, the command and control structure and mentality, fosters that kind of structure. It structures social isolation and in-group solidarity. It causes police officers to believe, because their interactions are confined mostly, if not exclusively, to other cops, that you don't have any idea what it's like to be a cop. You don't know because you can't know. You're not out there on the streets and you're not making these split-second decisions and so on and so forth. And that begins to collude with all these other forces to build up this barrier, this wall.
Military mentality.
That's exactly right. It is a military mentality, and yet there's something a little bit different about it, because unlike soldiers who follow orders for a living, police officers make decisions for a living. And they're absolutely important decisions, discretionary decisions, peace and freedom decisions, life and death decisions. And if they're around others who have come to this conclusion that this is what police work is, this is what police work looks like, and it is not an enlightened vision of policing, you will get cops committing horrible acts and oftentimes covering them up and lying for one another, as was the case in Rodney King and all the other controversial actions we've seen. So it's a very closed culture. It's a family that, I'll get psychological for just a moment and then I'll yield the floor. I was physically abused and emotionally abused by my father, who out Archie Bunker. I mean, this man was a racist, he was a sexist, he was certainly homophobic, and at about age 9 I started to resist. By 13 I was like, I am not going to be like Everett Eugene Stamper. I'm going to be as different from that man as possible. Well, I've already confessed, it lasted about 5 minutes. This resolve that I'm not going to be like my old man. I found a family. I was in the company now as a San Diego police officer who seemed to like me and welcome me. And they set the rules. You know, it's we were talking about this. It's not policies and procedures and what gets handed to cops or these manuals. It's what gets said in the locker room. It's what gets said by your partner in the front seat of that police car. That's the set of rules that most human beings will follow, because they are the rules for the workplace culture. So if we want to change that culture, no amount of 21st century police thinking, task forces, recommendations and suggestions will do it. Not that there's anything wrong with those task forces. And I think the one that Obama put together produced an excellent report. There's not a recommendation in it that I find myself disagreeing with. I'm just saying it just doesn't go far enough. We need a revolution. We need radical change. That system needs to look so much different from the way it looks today. Now, it ain't going to happen by Tuesday, but those of us who believe in that and are willing to do the heavy lifting to produce genuine systemic and structural change will perhaps for the next generation and beyond produce the kind of police work that all citizens deserve.
I'd like to ask John, please. The man deserves applause. I'd ask John to take, I want to combine 2 questions, and I've got a platform full of questions. If we could maybe get a timer now, so that we can be getting answers within a couple of minutes, so that at least I can live up to my promise. 10.
2 minutes, 3?
Let's do 2. Let's do 2. And
Which finger?
in about 20 minutes, I would like to invite the panel to come down to the floor and invite the attendees to come forward and have personal one-on-one interaction, exchange business cards, have a personal conversation. John, can you handle this? I've got a question of what good is policy if it's not being followed? And won't it be necessary to change police recruitment and training? Who writes the rules? And what do we do about the way our new police chief is being, which is part of the way the rules are written? How do we stick our finger in the spokes and get this new police chief to be more chosen of the people by the people? That's about 3 questions altogether.
Ask Sam that question
Oh.
about the policy too.
You should be timing me.
You were fine. How many minutes do you want to answer?
Let's try for 2.
Read the most.
I just got 2 more questions. And this community is okay, that's good.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, even if there are good policies in place, they're not necessarily followed. Right now, going back to the police auditor system that we have, people in the city government would tell you that there's a 3-tier system of police accountability now: the police auditor, the city council, and the public safety committee. But it's not functioning in a way that benefits us and meets our needs. It's not creating accountability, findings are hidden. I filed a complaint a few years ago, and I'm very familiar with the complaint process. I arrived at school to pick up my son. It's an elementary school. Someone had called in, someone has a gun, so the police were there. It was by Lighthouse Field. The police department decided to use the parking area of the elementary school as a buffer zone, and they had AR-15s out, and they're all oriented looking that way. And there are 20 elementary school kids standing next to an officer with an AR-15. The thrust of my complaint was, wouldn't it have been useful to encourage the children to move away from 4 officers with semi-automatic weapons? It turned out the officer who investigated my complaint, I talked to him once, he called me on the phone, he interviewed me. He was the commanding officer at that scene. He also used that same conversation to tell me that my complaint was not founded. I spoke to the police auditor about this, Bob Aronson, who, by the way, the officer also said to me, if it was such a big deal there at the scene that you're complaining about, why did no one else complain? When I talked to Bob Aronson about this, he said, yeah, I agree with you that shouldn't have been the same officer investigating the complaint. He shouldn't have said that to you. And what do you want to do about it? File another complaint about your complaint? So that's my answer for the moment.
Can I just say one,
Please.
2 things? So in terms of directly to the question of who sets policy, well, the city council sets policy, technically, but we do that by recommending to the police department that they bring us back policy in collaboration at times with the city attorney and the city manager's office. So we only have so much authority, even though we technically have the authority to set policy. And the only way that we can set better policy is if we have people who really care about these issues coming. So now I'm going to put my community organizer hat on and say, those of you who are here, this really is just a start. We need everybody who cares about this in our community to step up. And I would highly recommend that any of you who have not been on a police ride-along, you go, you begin to get that dialogue, set that dialogue in motion. And it will be noticed to the police department that there are people who actually want to have a conversation with them and are paying attention to what they're doing on the beat. right? So, so those are just a couple of things that I wanted to say in response to the two commentaries that.
Okay.
Can I have 30 more seconds?
Oh.
There's something really significant that happened when the Santa Cruz Police asked to use a Department of Homeland Security grant to buy an armored personnel carrier, which they now have. It's a Bearcat. They came to the city council and they said, we filed to get this grant a year and a half ago. If you don't approve it tonight, we'll have to not take the money. It turns out that there was a city policy that requires city departments like the police to let the city council know when they apply for such a grant. Not after a year and a half they go through the process of the grant. They violated that policy. The result of them having, that's addressing the question of the policies in place. The result of them having violated that policy was
Nothing.
nothing. No public comment, no responsibility, no accountability at all.
And that lockup was reported.
Okay, the WTO question about infiltrator, I invite you to talk to Norm, and I know he will talk with you. I've got to work through these questions. I made a promise. We've got a bunch of them up here. Police policies posted on the internet. Yes, the police 564-page manual is on the internet, and somebody up here will be able to tell you if you come find them when they're all standing down here. I have a question that probably is for those in the activist community, which is huge. It's about the way the police interact with homeless people. I think that I find, you don't care what I think. Who wants to take on the way Santa Cruz police handle the homeless?
You want to start?
Wow. That bad, huh?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that with my activist community organizing hat on and with my city council hat on. So I'm going to try to walk a line in between those hats and give you a very short answer to the question. I think that the police are very frustrated about the challenges that they face in being the last resort and only resort, really, for enforcing some really bad policies that we have on the books, and the camping ban being one of them. And I think that we absolutely, as a community, have to, and I think the police agree about this. I mean, I haven't talked to a single police officer, nor the chief, nor the deputy chiefs, who would disagree that we absolutely need to be putting our resources into prevention, mental health services, other resources, and because enforcement is the last and only resort at the moment, and they don't like it, just like we don't like it. So, you know, I think that it's not that simple. I think that the way that the police interact with homeless people, the kind of move along approach is not working, and I don't support it, and I don't support putting more resources into it. So, you know, I want to find ways for our community to have. I mean, again, I know it's easy to say and hard to do. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't, right? But I think that we also need to be speaking up about the way that enforcement happens. And there are people in the room who could speak more to this than I can, so I hope you all get to have your voice as well in this process. But I think we need to rein it in.
Okay, one of the questions I have is the man who threatened, I'm assuming, Posner, Councilman Posner, is he still on the force, and is this acceptable? He retired, and as near as I could tell, he retired with honors. And I think Sam has experiences of investigating officers that get promotions after they do things that we would like to see be the reason for them to leave the force.
Sorry, I'm intervening a little too much, but just, let's say, retired with honors and full salary, full benefits for life.
And you can get a Facebook post of this man doing profile and a ride along. And that it may even be in your handout.
I'm sorry, who was this again?
Steve Clark.
Steve Clark.
Oh, okay. You said the name Bosner, and I thought.
No. I have a question. There's a need for tremendous change very quickly if the problems are problems of a capitalist state. Won't it be necessary to reform? Won't it be necessary reform take too much? Won't the necessary reform take too much time? Reform takes a lot of time, and it's very, very frustrating. You didn't want me to answer that question.
Can I interject one thing? I think one thing that everyone has in common is we all want police to reduce the level of shootings.
Right.
And I think
Harm
that is
together.
something that the police department wants to do too. Again, I don't think that the police want to commit shootings. So I just think that there are ways.
Policies.
There's a concept called time, distance, and cover, and it is changing policing. So why isn't this use of force policy for the police department here, why isn't that concept, time, distance, and cover, included? It's not in the use of force policy. So I think that those that's an easy fix. So it's, I mean, it's not. I don't mean to say it's easy to get the police department to change the way it thinks about using force. But again, I think the concept of we're all on the same page. We want fewer shootings. How do you do it? And that there's some real tactical issues like using time, distance, and cover.
One of the questions is about bringing people from the military into the police department, and is there a way to do that that isn't harmful? I think I personally think it's you don't want my opinion. Somebody else talked about bringing military people into the police and the problems that brings.
I'd rather have people brought in who are well-trained in a whole other realm in being able to remain calm and cultivate calmness in a situation that has arisen already. They take time, they take distance, they take cover. Legitimate question in the killings of Luke Smith and Sean Arlt, why didn't the officers back away? On occasion, you could ask, why didn't they run away? Why didn't they get out of the way? They actually interject themselves into situations and are taught that their own safety becomes primary in a situation. I was defending myself all of a sudden against this person with a rake or a small knife. So I don't want the war model in policing in Santa Cruz.
Right. Amen.
I'm not going to get to all these questions, but if your question hasn't been asked explicitly, I invite you to come down to the front of the stage in a couple minutes. If we could get, is 2 minutes enough for a summation from everybody, and that'll put us about 20 minutes left in the room.
You need to be pretty strict about that.
Oops. Siri had to get in on this.
Okay, you guys need to look at it, man.
Let's see if we can, and I just want to say, I don't know that there's any good way to end this conversation. It's really clear the energy on, I got 2 more questions. It's real clear that the energy on the stage is really focused and really high. And I think that this needs to be translated into another meeting. I don't know that we can get all of this panel together. Norm came from Seattle, Sam came from San Francisco, but I think might be able to persuade Sam to come back. And I don't know, we've been feeding Norm pretty good. He might be willing to come back again too. But this is the beginning, I hope, of a process of the people of Santa Cruz being willing to work together to take their city back.
Here, here.
So, does the panel agree that we can kind of sum things up in a couple of minutes each?
Ask the question.
Can we give it a shot?
Yep.
Who wants to go first? No, okay. And Norm, why don't you sum things up and Sandy go next and Sam next to that?
I do think that we're talking about a revolutionary process. I thought we would kind of be past this point after 25 years. I do think that all of this does touch on the structures that we live inside in our culture, capitalism. It's important to ask, I think, whose lives and whose property are protected by the police? Who is benefiting most? That came up with the question about homelessness. And I think the key is to move towards nonviolent methods of dealing with violent situations that happen. That's what the police are expecting of us. That's why they bash in the door and grab those people, because they acted in a way that was violent. But there are the police doing the same thing, recreating that. So I think aiming towards restorative justice, nonviolence, is the way to go with our policing. And when we were creating the Police Review Board here back in 92, 93, 94, we were advised by John Crew, who was an attorney with the ACLU of Northern California, who said the police are going to oppose this thing all the way until it's definitely going to happen. Then suddenly they will become experts on what it should look like and how it should work. So it's important to remember that as things go forward. And I have this Santa Cruz Sentinel cover from 1992 as a picture of Santa Cruz Police Department officer Kevin Fogel. It says he has misgivings about the proposed review commission. Police close ranks on review. This last week he was quoted in the same paper saying he likes the idea of police review in Santa Cruz.
Nobody reads the paper one day to the next. Can't remember.
Very subtle, very subtle.
Sandy,
So,
take it next.
yeah, I'm not going to take too much time. I just want to say, you know, clearly we have a lot more work to do. And as a city council member, going into budget hearings, by the way, let's pay attention to those hearing dates, the 23rd, 24th, 25th, I think. I'm not sure when the police budget will come up, but, you know, stay in tune with that and come be a part of that, discussing that process, right? Because what we need is, as Samara mentioned earlier, there's a price tag attached to whatever it is that we do. So I'd really like to see people come out and support funding for better training, additional training for police officers. Why don't we have counseling services institutionalized within the police force? Why? Norm Stamper went and got help himself, right? Because the police department he was working in didn't have any institutionalized form of, or maybe it did, but maybe it wasn't useful, I don't know, in your case, but we don't have it, and we need it. So come and speak up about that. And I'm here to be a voice on the council for you all, as well as the many people out in the community who care about this.
And she was taking notes madly. Great,
I can't help myself.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who wants to finish, Sam or?
No, I prefer you take.
Oh,
I'm happy if you took my time.
Happy to do it. I want to thank a couple of people before my time starts, if that's okay. I want to thank you, Lee, for footing the bill, for flying me down here and back. And to Daryl for putting me up at Darling House. What a wonderful community. Okay. Policing in this country originates with a watchman-style concept, neighbors watching for neighbors, and then it gets a little more sophisticated as the Industrial Revolution hits. And the South comes directly out of the slave patrols. And throughout America, there are African-American families who sit down and over the table talk about the latest grievance, the latest injustice, who fear for the lives of their children, who hold the talk because they do not trust the police to be decent and responsible.
Law-abiding.
And law-abiding. Okay, so we have a problem that is as old as the institution. Police historically have been aligned with the moneyed and property class in America. Police historically have been aligned with landlords over tenants, management over labor. It's not, it shouldn't be the least bit surprising that we have an institution that is an anachronism. It is dysfunctional. That's not the people. We look at the people, we hold personalities accountable, as we must. I'm not suggesting we don't. But let's understand that what we're dealing with is a deep structural problem and do everything we can to rearrange the way the molecules are organized, to make our police departments a peacekeeping, partnered institution rather than a militaristic, antagonistic organization. That's up to the people. Many in the police are more than willing to help. The reason I talk about my vision in the present tense is that we have a hell of a lot of compassionate, thoughtful, considerate police officers who do a very good job, oftentimes in spite of some nasty peer pressure.
Bring it home, Sam.
Well, the pressure's on. That you're all here on a Saturday glorious day shows how much you care about these issues. And so when I see how much energy and all of the history, the first thing I think of is how do you get more people involved and more people seeing the importance of accountability and transparency, and that the department should represent who you are and what you want and your policies. So, I throw out ideas of, are there other organizations that are going to see those common alliances as well, that are going to be fired up as well to believe that this police department should represent what you want and what you believe in. So in that way, there's the energy, there's the vision, and then it's working out the details almost seems simpler than the getting everyone on board, and it means the editorials, it means knocking on doors, it means the talking to the police and asking them over and over again, why doesn't their website have all the data? Why don't you know about discipline? Why isn't there information about the training that they're doing? How have they responded to this last shooting? What changes have they made? I think those kinds of, the more you're at their door asking those questions, they have to start responding. It can't just be John on his own or you alone as a city council person. It's got to be everyone over and over again, because that, I do think it's each little chink, that's what's going to cause the final breakdown. So I wish you the best of luck, and I'm happy to talk to you about it, and again, just wish you the best of luck, that you have so much drive and vision of how to do it.
Dialogue is a really awesome opportunity to ask a lot of questions and learn a lot. So.
And I'll take a public pledge and I'll buy another ticket.
Wow.
I'll bring Norm back. Let's get organized. Let's go to chapter 2. We've got a basket, and we would like to pass the hat to help reimburse the Darling family. Excuse me, please. Shh. Let me finish. We'd like to collect donations to help defer the expenses that the Darling House has incurred by donating facilities for Norm. And Stacy, just pretend you're in church. Stacy will come by, and if you could make some contributions, that would be great. We're going to come down to in front of the stage. We've got 15 minutes before Tom wants his room back, but I don't think he needs to have the hall. So 15 more minutes in here, and then we can adjourn to the hall. I hope everybody has a chance to speak to our panelists and get their questions answered.